Hello, it's Cisvolk. Time to enjoy card making with me. I have a lot of beautiful Craft Emotions products here for me, including the Ocean series by Carlacreaties. Today I have a very special card for you. In this video I will show you how to make this cute box fold card. What's so special about this is that it's flat to put in an envelope, but when you unfold it you can place it down. It has a nice see-through, so you can see that cute octopus. Now let's see what you need for this. I used this super cute octopus stamp from Carlacreaties with the following text on it. I wish I was an octopus so I can hug you 8 times as much. Then I use Creaties pigment colors with a Tombow water brush to color the stamp. Furthermore, I'm using the Craft Emotions Ocean design paper. There you can see all the stamps and the stencil that goes with this series, all designed by Carla. These are the 2 sheets of designer paper I'm using today for my special box folding card. And you can see it's double-sided. I found some matching plain paper in my cupboard that I'd left, and it matches this side of the paper best. I have Craft Emotions Deckled Edge nesting dies. You can use those for so many things. I'm using the squares and circles. I will be stamping and coloring on watercolor card paper from Craft Emotions, Brilliant White 200 grams paper. And I'm going to use the regular Craft Emotions 250 grams smooth cardstock for the base of the card. The Hey There text is from this Summer Fun stamp set. Also one of my very favorites, so cute. So okay, let's get started. For the card base I'm going to use Craft Emotions white 250 gram cardstock. And I will be using 2 A4 sheets. Actually, I have a piece of paper that is smaller, but that is enough for the card. 1 A4 paper I cut at 13 centimeters wide. And it has to be 26 centimeters high. For that I need an attachment to make my guillotine cutter wider. It is lightweight, so that is very quick and easy to do. So 26 centimeters high. The other piece of paper needs to be a little wider. I cut it to 14 centimeters wide. And also 26 centimeters high, the same height, only 1 centimeter wider. I'm going to crease these pieces of paper at 13 centimeters. That corresponds approximately to 5 1/8 of an inch. This I fold over and make the fold seam extra smooth and sharp with a bone folder. I do the same for the other piece of paper. I also crease this at 13 centimeters so that they are nicely folded in half. So one is a centimeter higher than the other. The highest card we crease at 13 centimeters, all the way along the length of the card. Then I turn the card around because I want to draw a line, and I'm right-handed. I find it easiest that way. This will be an imaginary dotted line. Basically just needed to see where you want to draw a cut line later. So you start by drawing the line from the corner where the 2 creased lines meet to the opposite corner of the card. Approximately parallel to that, with a distance of 1 centimeter, you now draw a cutting line. It's not important whether this line is perfectly straight and equally wide everywhere, as long as there is room to glue it later. What I'm now horsing, we will later cut off. So the narrow edge and the triangular area goes off. Also a small piece of the strip above the crease line has to come off. I hope you can see it well. If necessary, freeze the image and take a screenshot or make a quick sketch of it. It's very simple, but you can quickly go wrong if you draw the wrong way around or start cutting at the wrong angle. So I have two panels, a narrow one of 13 by 26 centimeters and a wider one of 14 by 26 centimeters on which I have drawn lines. Now I'm going to cut a hole out of this card, and that hole will be approximately here. Of course, you will also see the hole on this side. This will be the bottom of the card. And this part will be the back of the card on the inside, so with text on it. I'll just write text here, so it says clear what is what. And this is going to be the bottom of the card, but the inner piece that you don't see prominently. This is where I'm going to stamp my name, the made by text. I always stamp a made by stamp on a card where I write Cisvolk. Well, so personal, don't you think? The text is written on the card like this, turned a quarter of a turn than you would have expected. This piece will be the bottom, and this also the bottom. Now I cut off this little strip, and also the triangle goes off. Now I want to crease the dotted line, which is not easy on the straight front, but for that I use the back of the creasing board that is actually meant for making envelopes. With this you can very easily crease a perfect diagonal line, see? The paper lies against the left side and I align the corners of the paper along the crease line. This edge I fold over to the inside. Too bad I didn't crease it on the other side, because now the folding is a little more difficult. The slanted edge I fold backwards. And then I cut off a small edge of the corner. I don't want the paper to stick out over the edge. It's an adhesive edge, so it doesn't matter if you cut a little too much. For the made by text I include the Box and Flowers stamp set. This is the stamp I use the most. It says handmade or made by. Yep, I made this. The one-of-a-kind card design I have in my second stamp platform, where I keep it to mass-produced card bases. I now take the small made by piece. I stick it to a clear block to quickly stamp it on the paper. Let's just erase the pencil text first. Lately I use VersaFine ink. It works perfectly for me for stamps that I want to be stamped well in one go. For the stamps that are a little darker I use the stamp with archival ink. That worked fine too, but I thought it was a shame that the stamps then discolored, and I find the VersaFine prints just a bit blacker and sharper. I'm using a Micron 05 fine liner to write my name next to it. For the other panel I'm going to die cut a circle in this part. This is the part that opens and closes. I also need to hold the card upright like this. I'll draw it here. Here comes the octopus. Not as nicely drawn as Carla does, but for the idea that you know roughly where we should go. This is where we want to die cut an opening, but how do you know where the center is? And for that, I first die cut a sample from thin printer paper, with the same die as I want to use for the card. I fold this in half, and in half again, so that there is a folded cross in it. Then I can use those folding seams. You'll see it in a moment. I lay my ruler down from corner to corner and draw a very thin line on the card. It's a temporary line. Also the other side. If you were to follow the whole ruler you would have drawn a cross. I erased the circle I drew so I can use the cutout piece later. I now place the die cut template on the card, following the folding seams. If they are exactly on top of each other, Then I have caught the center. On top of that I place the die, and this is what I'm going to die cut. Now that I've die cut it, I can erase the lines, although it's not completely necessary because I will stick some pattern paper over it. What is important is the size of the die. For this circle I took the 7th circle from the inside of the ring. This circle I do erase clean. I'm going to use that circle to stamp the text on. I will also use the pattern paper circles later. I'm going to use the card as a support for the die cut circle. Then it lies more firmly in my stamping tool and I have more room for magnets. The only disadvantage with decorative dies is that you have to search for a while before you find which way he fits in. This is how it fits. And that ensures that he always lies well and is firm. I'm going to stamp "I wish it was an octopus so I can hug you 8 times as much." Now I eyeball to align the text horizontally. The stamps are very sticky. They are of very good quality. I can put the die cut back in its place as often as I like. When I look along the lines on my stamping plate, I can see if I've stuck the text on crookedly. Now I'm going to use my embossing pouch. It has talcum powder in it, which ensures that excess embossing powder does not stick to the paper. I'm stamping with Memento Lux ink. You can also use VersaFine ink, which also makes the powder stick. For heat embossing I like the Memento Lux ink better, because it is slightly thicker and greasier. I stamp very carefully, but you see, I can stamp again on the exact same spot. And I want it very thickly inked for a nice print, so I stamp again. I don't push too hard on the lid either, because I want a nice sharp text. I will be heat embossing the text. I will put the card aside for a while. Over the text I sprinkle transparent embossing powder from Ranger ink. And this is the leftover piece that I cut off, but I'm going to use it to stamp a text on, and then I will die cut it. The "Hey there" text is going to be on top. I can do that one by hand. The text has to fit right in the corner. I will die cut it later. First I sprinkle embossing powder over it. And then I heat emboss the 2 texts. Above and below this text I draw a line, so I can see a little better how I want the die cut. I cut off any excess paper. Look, so you can see better if you cut straight. Now I have already die cut a piece of text, but I regret that a little. It's best to die cut this piece of text at the same time as the piece of patterned paper underneath that you need. Because it has a deckled edge, you should of course die cut the exact same angle for the paper as for the text strip in the corner. It won't be too obvious later on, but this is a tip for you to do it all at the same time. I also immediately cut off the top and bottom of the corner with the guillotine cutter. A little more is probably better. So now we have 2 texts ready. Now we're going to cut paper out of 2 sheets of plain paper, which in my case fit perfectly with these 2 pattern papers. With the second square of the die cut form, I used it to die cut out 3 solid blue squares. That's with the large die. And with a size smaller, the third from the form, so I cut out 2 pattern paper sheets. Of the circle dies, I took the 6th size from the outside of the form, and that's number 8 counted from the inside. I want to die cut those from the pattern paper and also from the plain blue paper. Also from this piece of pattern paper. What I do first is I lay these 2 on top of each other, because I want to cut those out together. Also, for finding the right place to die cut, I drew a cross and use the template for the 6th size circle die. I did it the same way for the bubble piece of pattern paper, only that one without an extra blue plain paper piece. I put it on top so that my lines are continuous, you see? Now I place the circle die on top and die cut them out together. So I cut it out and now I erase the stripes. I use my Tombow Mono Dust Sketch eraser for this. Now we are going to assemble the card. This panel should be turned a quarter turn so that it will lie like this. And that's where I want to glue these on. You can see that I have die cut a circle from the card panel one size smaller, counting number 7 from the inside. I stick it on with glue, because then I can still slide a little bit and see if it lies straight. In my glue bottle I put multi-coat matte glue from Craft Emotions. You can buy this glue in a jar. You can also apply it very well with a brush. Excess glue can be easily wiped away with a tissue without leaving any residue. The Hey There text comes here in the top corner. Make sure the card is properly rotated, so with the fold seam at the bottom. Now I'm going to die cut away a very small edge so that it fits better. But of course you do this in one go, cutting the text and the pattern paper together, or apart from each other, but with the same die in the same corner, so that the edges fit together perfectly. Okay, the text in the corner is on. Now we continue with the circles. This circle I have already glued on. This other circle I will also glue more towards the other corner. By using the panel with a cutout hole, which is not yet glued on by the way, I use the card panel as a template, with which I can see exactly where the center is. This is a tip to be able to find the center this way. For this card it's not very important, because you will not see the text directly through the hole, only at an angle. And because I find it optically more beautiful if it's slightly higher, I move it up a little. Now I will attach the two cards together. Behind this strip you will need glue or double-sided tape. I use double-sided tape and glue because I want to stick very firmly, and the glue also gives me a little wiggle room. I check to see if the parts are now nice and straight with each other. And then I stick the plain blue paper on top with the hole in it. One panel below I glued a plain square already. On top of the part with the hole comes the pattern paper. Now this left part will be on top of the right part. You see, I have now made the shape. Here on the back you can write your name and your text when the card is finished. This edge still needs to be glued. I use double-sided tape with a bit of glue on top. This has to stick very tight. And so now you put a plain square on top of the cut triangle. If the corners and edges are touching, it will fit just right. I lay it down flat to press the glue on. This needs to dry for a very short time. We can hide this adhesive edge by sticking a piece of plain paper on top of it. I've now put double-sided tape on this, and so I will stick it to the bottom of the card. You can only see a very small edge of the adhesive seam. So and now if you fold the back in, you can flatten it again. I regret that I used such thin paper with double-sided tape, because if there is no glue everywhere, it will of course wrinkle. Well, you learn from my mistakes. And it's the bottom of the card, so no bother if it's not perfect. If I would do it again, I would have made a folding seam in the blue paper beforehand and would have applied it with a thin layer of glue. Well, at least this way you can see how the card works. Then I want to have an octopus in it now. For that I'm going to stamp on 200 grams watercolor card paper. I love using this paper because it's smooth and also very white. Here I stamp the octopus on. It's a very strong and sticky stamp, a very good quality. With some talcum powder I make the paper grease-proof, so I can heat emboss over it later. I stamp with memento ink and emboss with transparent Ranger ink embossing powder. I stamp a few times in the same place so that the print is nice and thick and black everywhere. Now I sprinkle transparent embossing powder over it. I use 2 sheets of paper to catch the excess powder. This way I can easily put it back into the jar. It's Ranger clear embossing powder I used in combination with Memento Lux ink. I always heat porous paper from the back side. If you heat the top, the embossing powder sinks into the grooves of the paper and is not visible anymore. If you heat the bottom side and you don't stay in the same spot for too long, the powder melts perfectly and stays on top so that you see those nice shiny edges. And those edges will be very handy later on when coloring. You can see the embossing powder shining. Now I think there's not enough embossing powder on the eyes. I have a solution for that. I roughly cut out the image so that I don't dirty the rest of the paper, and now I'm going to color with a special ink pen, which is actually a pen that has transparent embossing ink in it. I color with this over the eyes, so to speak. Now there's a sticky layer of transparent ink on top, which allows me to apply an extra layer of embossing powder to the eyes. Now they have become slightly more rounded and even shiny. To color the octopus I use the pigment colors from Creaties. It's actually paint powder in a bottle. And such a bottle looks like this. This is the pink color number 8. I'm not using it now, but I want to show it. I think it's a little too dark for the octopus, so I want to use this color. That's one of the newest colors, number 4, orange red. I sprinkle a little powder of that on my glass mat. This can also be done on a small dish, of course, if you don't have a glass mat or if you want to keep your work surface clean. Then I use a Tombow mono brush with a fine tip for coloring. The text is already soaked off. I use this water brush very often. It doesn't leak and works perfectly for this technique. I have a folded tissue which I use to wipe my brush clean or in between to check if there's too much ink on the brush. Before I start, I wipe my brush clean and a little dry. Then I dip a little bit of powder on my brush. You can already see what color is coming out. And then I start coloring. Preferably on a spot where you want to put a darker shade anyway. In this case on the back arm, which will be slightly darker than the front arms. You see, you wipe out the powder and can easily create a lighter shade in places where you want it lighter by wiping over the same spot more often. Some new water will come out of the brush automatically, so the ink will spread easily. This watercolor card paper holds up pretty well to water, so you can easily go over it a few times. You can see that I re-dip when the color gets too light. The nice thing about this powder is that every time you dip in, the ink color is just a little different in hue. This is because there are multiple shades of ink in the powder, so it's a surprise every time. With powder colors with different shades, such as the middle brown color number 27, you will have to pay extra attention to it, what the color is and where you color it in. The cool thing about this is that you can get very cool effects with one bottle, like I did with the coloring of the guinea pigs. These awesome guinea pigs are also designed by Carlacreaties, and I used for the coloring of all of them the Creaties middle brown pigment colors number 27. You can see that the guinea pigs have different shades of brown. I combined the coloring of some of the guinea pigs with black distress oxide for the black fur and blue and pink distress ink for the nose and eyes, especially for the black parts and the shadow in the eyes and color on the cheeks. It is also very cool to sprinkle this powder on a card, spread it out and then spray it wet like I did with the background for these cards. You can let it air dry, but the cool thing about this powder is that they shine extra when you heat emboss them, as there is a kind of embossing powder in them to give an extra puffy dimension and shine. This guinea pig series is so cool. I don't manage to make videos of everything. On my Instagram account you can find all the photos of the cards I made and also some short videos and of course lots of tips and tricks in my highlights. Now back to the octopus. I've sped up the video so you don't get too bored watching the whole coloring. For the orange-red color number 4, it's much easier to color in. The shades of ink are closer together. If you would mix the powder with water on your palette, you get an even color, while I let the color mix on the paper. You see that I soften the color in the middle of the head by coloring with less pigment and more water that floats out of the brush. For darker parts, I just use more powder and I wipe my brush dry on the tissue before applying more new powder on the brush. You see that I start at a dark part and work my way into a part that needs less color. You really don't need lots of pigment powder. The first layer has now dried. I'm now going to apply a second layer to areas where I want shading to get depth. I take new ink again on my water brush and this time only color the edges and especially the bottom edges, the parts that are more backwards and the parts that are next to something or behind to something normally that catch shadow as well. So that means the bottom edges of the tentacles, the edges along the suction cups and the edges of the head. And I also apply some extra color to the cheeks. For the most part, I work with smooth, stipping or swirling motions. I'm really not coloring precisely here. First I apply the shades of dark paint and then I let it blend out with my water brush. Sometimes even drying it out completely and touching up later with additional darker shades. In places where I want it darker, I add some ink, and in places where I want more light, I wipe it out. Keep in mind that this only works with good watercolor card paper. To me, it's much easier to work with explosion powders than with regular watercolor paint. If you want parts to be lighter, it is best to wipe from light to dark and then in between wipe the brush clean on a tissue. In this way you pick up excess ink from the paper. Coloring on regular paper is also possible, as I did on my envelopes, but then you have to be much more careful with water and you can't swipe the color back and forth too much. I'm sure there are many more techniques for coloring with water-based ink, but this is how I do it and how I find it easiest and most fun to do. Carlacreaties has also made videos where she colors and shows techniques and products that you can use to color her super cool stamps. Be sure to visit her channel as well, you won't regret it. Now I still have to add some color to the cheeks and darken the bottom a little bit and then I am satisfied. Actually, I'm never completely satisfied, but okay, you have to stop at some point. But only after I applied some extra details on these pimples and after I smoothened these pimples again. Those little dots in the stamps are always handy, so you don't have to think too much. For some more shadow, I like to use distress ink, the color Weathered Wood. I dip a small amount of it on my work mat. I clean my water brush on my tissue. Then I pick up a small amount of ink on the tip of my water brush. I check my tissue to make sure it's not too thick and then I draw a shadow in the eye with a smooth line. Just not quite touching the edge, but just a little bit out of the edge. I try to draw the line from thin to thick by pressing a little harder in the middle than at the edge. Where the line is too thick or dark, I go over it again after wiping my water brush clean. See? In the same way I'm going to shade the suction cups of the tentacles. It's almost impossible to see because I do want them to stay white, of course. It's just about the shadow. I'll do this with all the dots. And then I now take the third square deckled edge die from the outside. I use that to die cut the octopus. You can see that the edges are now die cut out nice and jagged. Now I'm going to cut out the other side of the octopus. I keep a few millimeters on the edges. I think that fits best in this case. When cutting, it is best to use a sharp, small pair of scissors. You turn the paper, hold the scissors at the bottom of the paper so you can see where you left off, and you also cut very slowly. The slower you cut, the more beautiful the result. You cut along the line of the drawing, but keep your scissors still, your other hand doing most of the work. Since I'm cutting anyway, I immediately grab a piece of bubble pattern paper. I'm going to cut out a number of bubbles as decoration for the octopus later on, and perhaps for the envelope. Again, I hold the part I want to use and turn the paper in all directions. Now I can glue the octopus to the card. I also check that it is still in place when the card is folded shut. And I glue some bubbles to it, as you can see also on the edge of the paper. On the envelope I can glue some leftover pieces. I have these leftover pieces from die cutting the deckled edge squares of the card. See, that is what this is from. Next to my craft mat I have a craft sheet, which is ideal for gluing. You wipe it clean very easily. Especially for thin edges, this is handy. Then you spread the glue with a brush and you do not have to worry about a sticky table. I also glue the extra bubbles on. And the other piece can be glued to the back. I mark off the edges of the flap. Then I cut the frame there and tape the top part to the flap and the bottom part to the bottom of the envelope. Otherwise it can't open and close, of course. Do you also like to use your scraps to decorate the envelope? Let me know in the comments. An easy and pretty match for the card. And here's the card. Isn't it great? And now we see how it opens like this. Now we can see the inside of the card. The text is revealed and you can see through the die cut hole. This way you can put it down. You can look through it to see the text too. The bottom doesn't look so nice because I stuck the thin smooth paper on with double-sided tape, which is a pity. Here in the middle you see made by Cisvolk. A nice discreet place to put your name. While of course on the back you write a nice message. This is the other envelope I made. There I die cut rounds from the rest of the rounds left over from the die cuts. I hope you enjoyed watching this video and I hope you learned something from it again. Please subscribe to my channel and watch my other videos as well. You can find a product list in the description. Enjoy card making with me and have a lovely crafting time. Bye bye!